Here's the deal. I don't believe them. I don't believe the mainstream media, and neither should you. They have misled us every step of the way regarding this election, and they've got a long, long track record of getting the biggest issues of our time totally, totally wrong. One of my favorites, or least favorite, I should say, and is very, very personal to me, the Iraq War. The Iraq War, 2002, 2003. Wow, what a complete and total disaster, right? Do we all agree? We had no business going into Iraq. It did not make our country any safer. But when it happened, well, the media just kind of stood by. In fact, it was the New York Times that told us they had weapons of mass destruction. The New York Times greenlit the war in Iraq, which, well, now we have thousands of veterans who have stumps instead of limbs, right? PTSD and every problem that goes with it. Not to mention all the lives lost, both American and Iraqi, and throughout the coalition. And the media, they just got it all wrong. And so did the Republican establishment. George W. Bush, he's suddenly a hero. He's welcomed again. Why? Because he hates Donald Trump. That's why. That's why we're hearing more from W again. What else did they get wrong in a big, big way? Which was a disservice not only to Democrats, but to Republicans, actually, especially Democrats. Do you think this helped your side if you're a Democrat and you're watching? The New York Times telling you that Hillary Clinton had like a 90 to 95% chance of winning the election in 2016, all the way up to like October. They were calling it. They had that silly little chart in the New York Times telling us how decisive her victory would be. And of course, we know what happened. How about this? Kavanaugh, the hearings, you remember what happened back then. Ah, boy, this was a low, low, low point. Christine Blasey Ford had no evidence whatsoever. She just had a dim recollection. Didn't know the month, didn't know the year, didn't know anything, didn't know the House. Yet the entire country stopped and watched her testify for, what was it, 2 days? 2 days. We watched that fiasco just because she said it happened and she hadn't told anybody, and zero credibility, zero reason really to stop an entire country to say, look at this. And you compare that to how the media treated Tara Reade. You probably don't even know who that is. Tara Reade was a young woman in 1993, and in recent months she came out and said Joe Biden sexually assaulted her. Now, they didn't take her seriously, the mainstream media. They went out of their way to ignore her or disrespect her or try to destroy her. Why? Well, she was going after a Democrat, plain and simple. She was going after a Democrat. She had a lot more corroborating evidence than Christine Blasey Ford, a lot more. She could actually establish that she worked for Joe Biden. She was an employee of his Senate office. I mean, that's something. That's significant right there. She told people in the early 90s that she was assaulted by this guy. Now, look, may or may not be telling the truth, but to totally ignore it, you compare it to what they did with Christine Blasey Ford, that doesn't make sense at all. Well, unless bias, all right? It's bias, and it's the media covering up for people they like and going after people they don't like. Here's another little item that, again, the mainstream media overlooked, but it looks like her mother, Tara Reade's mother, actually called the Larry King Show back in 1993. Christine Blasey Ford's mother lived in San Luis Obispo, California, called in and explained the problem her daughter was having.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do besides go to the press in Washington. My daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do it out of respect for him.
Or she had a story to tell, but out of respect for the person she worked for, she didn't tell it.
That's true.
Isn't that something? Wow. If Christine Blasey Ford had something like that, I don't think we'd have Justice Kavanaugh right now. But some are saying we have President-elect Biden. Don't get me started on that president-elect stuff. He's not president-elect. He's not. All right, finally, the biggest mistake they've made, and another reason to not believe them, the Covington kids. You saw what they said and wrote and did to those poor kids. I saw the video right away. First, I saw the headlines. I'm like, oh boy, these kids sound like jerks. You know, I just saw headline after headline. You probably did too. And then I watched the video and I listened to it. And I just saw a gentle young man looking at an individual who seemed to be taunting him. Nicholas Sandmann, right? Wow. What courage, what dignity, what dignity. So that's just a small sample. Why would we ever believe them? When they tell us that there was no voter fraud, no evidence. Yeah, there's one of the many headlines, Catholic school to investigate taunting of Native Americans. Didn't happen, didn't happen. Yet they all wrote it. Fortunately, those kids are going to be very, very rich. A lot of those news organizations are settling up, settling up. All right, those are just some examples. I got something else I want to show you. If you really want to understand the media culture in Washington, D.C. and beyond, think back to when you were in high school, okay? You had the cool kids table, and then you had, you know, the academics, and you had the punks, and you had, you know, everybody kind of sat in their own little world. That's very much like the media. They kind of want to be at the cool kids table, or at least they're sitting around judging everybody. Who's cool, who's not. Right now, if you're a Trump supporter, if you think there's voter fraud, you're not a cool kid. Take a look at this. It's Mean Girls.
Nerds, cool Asians, varsity jocks, unfriendly black hotties, girls who eat their feelings, girls who don't eat anything, desperate wannabes, burnouts, sexually active band geeks, the greatest people you will ever meet, and the worst.
The Mean Girls, I gotta tell you, mean boys, mean girls, they're all over the place in the media establishment. I wish they were more like, not Mean Girls, but this movie that I really, really liked, The Breakfast Club. Do you remember this? At first, they all seemed very, very different to each other. You had the jock, you had the greaser, you had the punk, you had the preppy, you had the geek. And after a little while spending time with each other and talking to each other, they realized they had so much in common. The Breakfast Club, way back in the 1980s, but I think it still holds true. Unfortunately, many in the media, this is not their movie. They're more Mean Girls fans.